Hey everybody, welcome back. Today is a big day. Today is Chop Chop Day. We're taking the car out to Scott's over at Team 512 and we're going to be putting a cam in my 2004 C5 Corvette. So of course we got to give you the final start before the cam. So the car is now up on a lift. Now we're going to go ahead, we're going to take the wheels off and then we're going to start draining out the coolant.
You got sand in there?
It's winter time.
Sand.
Well, I do live by the beach, you know. So that's the perfect reason. All right, so now under the passenger side front, in order to drain the radiator coolant, you're going to turn this little plastic doohickey here. And all right, so now we're going to let that drain out for the next however many minutes. So the wheels are off. Coolant is still draining. It's been going for about 10 minutes. So while that's doing that, we're going to go ahead and we are going to take off the front air bridge, front air intake, radiator shroud, and maybe a few other things. But I'll check back in with you. Right now I'm going to put you on a time lapse and let's get to it. Next step now with the air bridge out of the way, all we have to do is take the radiator shroud off, which is done with these two 10mm bolts. Shroud's removed. Now we're going to take the 4 hoses off the water pump. You got these 2 smaller hoses, this big hose here, and then another big hose right up front. Once we do that, we'll relieve the tensioner as well. All right, so after getting the water pump off, we had to go to the next step, which was removing your front sway bar. That's done by removing these 2 13mm bolts here. There's one there and one up here. Remove those 2, remove your end links, drop your sway bar out of the way, and then on the back of the radiator, there's all these clips that are holding the electric wiring in. Undo those, and then there's these 2 electrical connectors on each fan, one on each fan. You're gonna have to use a small flat blade screwdriver just so you can get it up under here, so you can pry that little connector up and then pop this all out at the same time. So now with those connectors out of the way, see that's what it plugs into. So now with all that out of the way, we're gonna drop the car back down and get to removing the radiator. So the radiator's out of the way. There's a whole bunch of electrical clips on here that would need to be removed in order to get all the wire harnesses out. At least all the wiring loops and all that. Obviously these went to the water pump. These 2 connections went to, I believe, the radiator coolant reservoir. And then, I don't know at what year they started this, but this here and down here are coolant lines for the transmission fluid. So those had to be disconnected as well from the radiator. And then coming over to the car, in order to pull that out, there's 4, these 2 tabs, one up here and one down there on each side. You just had to lift the AC condenser a little bit to dislodge it from the 4 tabs that are here on, there you go, those 4 tabs there that are on the radiator itself. And then you're able to, and then once you do that, then you're able to lift the radiator up and out of the way, giving us room to now pull the alternator and get into removing the steering rack. Right now, Scott is helping out with just locking down the steering wheel. You need to make sure that is straight. That is a key point, that you need to keep that steering wheel straight during this whole next process. Just got done taking the alternator off, 2 15mm bolts, and then down there was a 13mm bolt holding in the steering rack, which we now have unbolted here. So that brings us into now pretty much jacking the car back up, getting underneath it again to start doing all this fun jazz down here. All right, now Scott's going to unbolt the tie rod end.
So one thing we don't want to do though is we don't want to mar up the threads here. So what we're going to do is we're going to throw the nut back on like that and then strike the nut. As opposed to the tie rod end. That should be coming off. There we go. So that's a little trick there so you don't mar up the threads on your tie rod end.
There you go. All right, so now after we undid the power steering rack, we undid the bolts that were holding the rack to your cross member here. We raised up the rack as high as we can. As you can see, we need to drop the front cross member just a little bit to gain just a little bit more room so we can get this bushing up above this area so we can pull this out and slide it out through the passenger side. So Scott's gonna do that now. Now Scott's leaving just a few threads on there just so we don't completely drop it. We just need to lower it just a little bit. All right guys, so we almost have the rack out. We have it, I don't know. I don't even know if you'd call that 3/4 of the way out, but we're gonna go break for dinner. And while we were doing this, we got power steering fluid shooting up all over the place. We got it hitting the ducts above the car. We're having a great time though. Schmutz all over the engine bay. But when we come back, this rack will be out. The rack is out. As you see, we got power steering fluid and all kinds of fluid all over the place. So we'll clean that out. But we did come out through the driver's side. It just seemed to be a little bit easier to come out the driver's side. I know everything was saying to come out the passenger side, but with the steering box pretty much like right behind here, we just all we had to do was just the feet getting past all these lines right here, and it came pretty much straight out. We did have to lift it up a little bit. We had to crank. We did loosen up the front member bolts here just to clear these brackets with the power steering rack. And we tried going out the passenger side. It just wasn't going. So we took it out the driver's side, and it came out pretty good. Now, one tool that I forgot to mention that is pretty much essential in order to get the power steering lines loose is a crow's foot wrench. Now, this tool made it really simple to at least loosen the power steering lines. Then once you get them loose, you can pretty much get them off by hand. But using this was almost essential in order to get into that tight spot. Alright, so after we got the power steering line out of the way, we had to get a 15 mil box wrench to take off the tensioner here in order to get your AC belt off. And now we have a clear shot at going for the crank bolt. So Scott's going to break out the 24 mil with his impact, and we're going to see if we can get that one loose. Alright, so Scotty's breaking out the 24 mil on the impact gun here. And he's going to
see if we can break that loose. There we go. The bolt is out.
And we got it. So now all we got to do is get the 3-jaw puller on there and take that balancer right out.
Right now it feels like it's getting easier. See?
Oh, it's moving.
Is it?
Yeah. I mean, I can't see it moving, but there's a difference from where you started to now.
I'm a fucking genius, dude.
There you go. You got it. All right, guys. So what Scott had to do for this puller, because our screw there wasn't long enough. What is that, like a 6-inch extension you put in there?
Yeah, something like that.
So we put that in there and then put the puller to that. And there's the puller. All right, so there's a total of 8 bolts on the front of the timing cover, and then 2 that are on the bottom that you have to get with a open-ended wrench of some type, or box wrench, whatever. The 2, well, actually, there's only one that really gives you an issue on the front cover, and that's this one all the way here on the bottom left. Now you had to take off the tensioner pulley here with a 15 mil socket, take that pulley all the way off, and then you can have access to that last 10 mil bolt. All the other ones were pretty easy to get to, but that was the one that was difficult. So now we'll be able to just pop the timing cover off and we'll be inside.
Driver back here and pry it away from the car, and now we're ready to pull it off.
There we go.
And there you go, you guys. So you can see the timing chain and the cam gear and the oil pump all right there at the front of the engine.
So now with the timing cover off, since I am replacing the oil pump, we will take off the oil pump. There's 4 bolts here, 1, 2, 3, 4. Once those bolts are off, we're going to put the crank bolt back in, and we're going to line up the cam gear with this dot, and then there's a dot on the crank gear. Once we pull the pump off, we'll be able to see that a little bit better. And line them up, top dead center, dot to dot. And then we'll get into removing the cam gear and then removing the cam. Now, after he removes those 4 bolts on the front, there is the pickup tube on the bottom that you have to take. I believe it might be like an 8mm bolt. That's right on the pickup tube. So there's the 8mm bolt for the pickup tube. Now we're just going to put maybe like a little paper towel on there, just so we don't want to drop that bolt down to the oil pan. A little added security. And then once we get that off, we'll be able to pull the oil pump out. I misspoke. The bolt on the pickup tube was a 10mm. So now we're going to line this up dot to dot. We put the old cam bolt back in. Now we're going to crank this until we see the other timing dot. Alright guys, so now we got the cam gear dot to dot with the crank gear. So now we can go ahead and take the cam gear off. And then doing so, we will take the timing chain off. Alright, so now you just have to pull that cam gear straight out, straight towards you. Little wiggle wiggle. And then bam. There you go. And then we will be replacing the timing chain, so that can come off too. And then there we go. Now we have the cam retaining plate. I believe that's what that's called. We have 4 bolts on there. We're going to undo those 4 bolts, and I'll bring you into the next step. So right now we're in the process of taking the coil packs off. We'll take the valve covers off and then remove the rockers and then the push rods. Alright guys, so after we removed the Valvetrain, we had to take the coil packs off. I believe there's, what, 5 or 6 bolts that held the coil packs on. 3 or 4 bolts that held the valve covers on. And then we took off loosened all the rockers and pulled all the rockers out in one assembly. They are sitting on the table over there, ready for the trunnion upgrade. So now with your 4 cam retaining bolts off, now you can go in and pull your cam retaining plate off. Gasket came with it, which is key. You want to make sure your gasket is still in good shape. So now with that removed, we're going to put 2 of the water pump bolts in there just so we can get a better grasp on the cam. We're going to spin the cam, make sure the lifters are up in the trays. Then I'm going to get my 5/16 dowels and put the dowels in each one of these holes here, just to ensure that the lifters do stay up when we pull the cam out. You say to keep turning it, and the second it grabs, keep turning it until it doesn't grab anymore. Now I gotta take these water pump bolts off.
Ah, there it is.
And there's
It
one
is out.
stock LS1 cam. Looking fucking good.
Nice work, buddy.
There it is.
It's out.
It's out. Chilling out, it's good. Maybe we'll take the valve springs out.
Oh, come on, man.
Alright, let's drink some beers.
Alright, so that's going to do it for part 1 on the disassembly for the cam. Now, as you can see and hear behind me, we did put it back together. So tune in to part 2 on when we put my car back together and we go for the first start after the cam.